Welcome back to another episode of The Playbook. That standard intro has been there for over a year, over 2 years. 2 years. Oh shit, we're literally coming up to 2 years, which is insane. 3, 4, 5. Yeah. I mean, on and off, but it is what it is. It's not going to be the podcast that is how many ever episodes. I think this is episode 70, which in and of itself, I mean, almost 70 hours, probably close to 60, to be honest, in terms of talking, is quite a while to be listening to me. But again, it came up this week in terms of the importance of formulating your ideas, because somebody was doing a podcast for the first time and said how awful they were. But it's like, okay, first time you stepped into the gym, how was that experience? First time you drove a car, how was that experience? It's like only through repetition, only through practice will you begin to improve and get better at speaking and public speaking and formulating your ideas and transcribing that or transferring that into your ability to speak it out into the world. Because when I listen back to my first episodes, it was far from any good whatsoever. But it's crazy to think that it's been almost 2 years and I was only in the industry 6 months when I decided to set it up. How naive, how confident, and speaking about ideas, which I go back and I'm like, oh, that's actually interesting. So sometimes you surprise yourself. Today I'm going to be speaking about something that has come up for me this week, and quite regularly, actually, to be honest. And it's something that has always been somewhat vague for me, and maybe it might be vague for you too. It's this idea around culture. And what is culture? Why is it important? Examples of it and how to create it and how to generate it and how to reinforce it. And I was thinking about this just earlier, and I think I first started thinking about this in March, April 2024, when I was doing my interviews to join another company in a managerial role. A question that I decided to ask some of the people I was interviewing was, if I spoke to one of the brokers out there, what would they tell me about the culture? And I remember I sat down in front of what is a massive company in Dubai, a massive name in Dubai. And this person was the head of sales or one of the directors, but very, very high up. The whole conversation was about him. I mean, he described everything and failed to ask me questions whatsoever. And it's the age-old thing of going straight into a pitch without asking me the right questions. It's like a symptom of being a bad salesperson. And this person is head of a company and he can't even formulate a sales journey for me and prospect and ask me the right questions and build rapport and then come with the sales pitch. He went straight into the pitch, which is laughable because, I mean, you're supposed to be the person training, helping, mentoring, guiding people in order to be salespeople, and you can't even do it yourself. It's an interesting idea. Maybe you're in a sales environment. Okay, start thinking about the person who is your manager, the person who is the head of your department. How are they when it comes to conversations? How are they in an interview? How are they when speaking to clients? Do they practice what they preach, or do they just go into the me show? But anyways, I digress. I was speaking to him and I asked him this very question. I said, what if I went to one of your brokers and I asked them about the culture? What would they tell me? And he was completely flabbergasted. Just, oh, that's an interesting question. I've never thought of that. What do you mean you've never thought about it? It's such an important aspect of a company. Maybe you've been too ingrained on me, and you haven't even thought about the environment that you're creating. But anyways, I think he gave me some bullshit answer about how somebody would say that it's good culture. I sat back and I was like, in my head afterwards, like, what does good culture mean? Like, that's so unbelievably vague. It's outrageous. Like, define culture first, and then define good, and then define good culture. You said good culture. What does good culture look like? It's it's so vague, and it's not being specific whatsoever. So it made me think about what culture is. And it's something that comes up sometimes in interviews. And I was doing an interview this week with somebody who might be coming into a managerial role, and we were speaking about culture. And take a drink for every time I say culture, honestly, in this podcast. And it's something that I've thought about deeply in terms of what is it and how do we drive it and how do we create it. It's interesting that a lot of the things that I tend to think about would be tied in with psychology, human behavior, psychology of influence, which obviously would have been my undergraduate degree. It's funny how things are kind of full circle, and it's always reintroduced into my life. When I rejected the idea of psychology, and that has been a valuable pursuit post university, it's something that always keeps coming up into my life. I think trying to define culture is always going to be limited by the ability of the words that we speak and how well we can articulate it, but I'll give it a bit of a shot. I think culture is the feeling, is the environment, is the atmosphere that you get in an office. But the best way for me to describe it would be to talk about the things that influence it. You can have positive and toxic cultures, but again, that's being quite vague. The things that would define a culture are the things that we accept and the things that we do not accept, the values that we hold, the things that we think are important. Not just think are important, but these have to be transcribed, and this has to be transferred, and these have to be vocalized for people, your people, to understand who we are. And that idea of who we are is important. It's the collective feeling that we are an entity, that we are a force moving together, not different, not opposites, not separated. Because in a lot of companies, in a lot of office environments, it's a us versus them when it comes to people on the ground, brokers, let's say in real estate, and management. If you have that distinct separation and it is a massive hole, a massive ridge, then you're not really creating somewhat of a culture because it's separated. It doesn't feel together. It doesn't feel as one. And when we dig deeper into that, it's the values that we all agree upon, and the values that we go out into the world and replicate because that's who we are. It is the ability and the environment that we create. And I'm going to talk specifics when it comes to this company, my company, because the company I work for, because without it, it's going to be vague again. So let's talk about the real estate environment. Let's talk about the real estate atmosphere, and let's talk about a brokerage. The culture that we have created in the company that I'm currently working for is a culture in which that people understand the broker comes first, that we have a defined way of doing things in the way that we operate, and there is far more meaning and contribution and value that can be derived by somebody more than their monetary contribution, where we value the individual on the individual basis and their contribution to the company in terms of how bought in they are, how much of a team player they are, how often and how visible they are in the office, putting their hand forward for stepping up to the plate when required, and being a go-to individual of influence when it comes to a good role model to brand new brokers. The culture we have created is a culture in which that when people succeed, the person to the left and to the right of them aren't secretly wishing the worst upon them. They are genuinely delighted and happy for this individual being successful and closing a deal, which caveat is not that common within a real estate environment, which I will get into when I'm talking about a negative, toxic culture. The culture is the things that we say, how we speak, how we go into the world, how we conduct ourselves, what we accept and what we don't accept, and knowing if I do X, I will get Y. So if I act a certain way, I'll be reprimanded. If I act a certain way, I will be rewarded. It's the behaviors that we have, the habits that we maintain, the standards that we upkeep. This is what slowly, brick by brick, layer by layer, builds a culture in terms of who we are as an individual. And for the company that I work for, that support for people doing well is so far beyond just closing deals, where, for example, one of our brokers was in a boxing fight and we were the loudest people in the room, where anytime there's team events or team sports, whilst we mightn't be the most talented at random sports that we've never done before, everybody chips in and shows up, and people who aren't participating show up and they support. And again, we're the loudest group in the room. And when you are part of our team, we make you feel part of our team. When you're part of our company, you should feel part of our company as well. That we are creating something together, that we are moving forward, that we don't accept negativity, that we don't accept toxicity, that we don't accept dishonesty, that we don't accept people with low integrity that can't hold true to their word. Now, every now and again, you get individuals that slip through the net. But when I do not remove this person from the environment, or after a while they don't change their behavior, then unfortunately we have to let that person go. And that is for upkeeping our standards, upkeeping who we say we are, and upkeeping our culture. That dilutes itself when companies scale massively. No, that can dilute itself when companies scale massively, because I think they lose themselves in the process. There are big real estate companies out there where some of our brokers previously were working, and when they join, they talk about it. They talk about the negative environment where it feels like you're another number, where it feels like you aren't genuinely appreciated for who you are as an individual, where you can't come forward and express who you are as an individual, where it feels like you're just in a call center, where it feels like at any moment in time somebody can come in from behind your back and swipe a deal from under your nose. That's an atmosphere. That's a culture that people have created based off what's rewarded and what's not rewarded, based off what's incentivized. And I think this incentivization is going to be a root cause in terms of the culture that we create. Because if we do not reprimand somebody for dishonestly going behind somebody's back under the table in some dishonest way, then we are saying that we accept this, that this can be accepted in this environment. So as a result, it slowly creeps in as part of our culture. So time and time again, we've had people join from some of these big names in the industry, and that's what they say. They talk about the feeling that they have in terms of who they are and the culture that we've created here and the environment that we've created here. And the environment is always trickled down from upper management to middle tier management to the brokers. So if you have a CEO of or an owner of a company not leading by example and not setting in stone their values, their habits, and talking about and acting in a way that we all agree is our culture, then as a result, you won't get the culture that you want. But if you have, for example, an owner who shows up for people based off who they are and appreciates people based off their effort, not only on their outcome, somebody who gives and gives and gives and provides space for people outside of work, then that is the leading by example. And then as a result, ideally your upper management will, as a result, lead by example also, and it's a trickle down effect to the brokers. Like, I was speaking to a guy who works for a company in which that if somebody does well and somebody closes a deal, he said the way in which people talk about that individual is insane, where there's clear jealousy behind it. And if someone's is announced as closing a deal, it's, yeah, but he's fat. Yeah, but he's bald. But yeah, whatever about his partner. And hearing that gives me a pain in my stomach, because I cannot believe that is an environment that is created in a company in the industry that I'm working in. And I can't believe that that's acceptable and that that has become the norm. And why that gives me a pain in my stomach is everybody, the majority of people can be easily influenced based of the environment that they're in. Humans are adaptable. We want to be in the in group. We don't want to be outside of the group. We don't want to be rejected by the group. So as a result, unconsciously or consciously, we accept and fit in with the crowd in order to be accepted. So that comes by doing things in order to fit in. So if at the start you aren't the kind of person who would knock someone based off when they're successful, but slowly but surely the environment that you see is everybody doing that, then after a certain period of time, it will just become acceptable for you to do so. And this was a conversation with somebody from a company here who seems to be taking on some of the negative attributes of the environment that they're in. And this isn't based off the individual, because the individual is not influenced purely by their conscious decision as much as they would like to be, like you or like I would be. Everybody is going to be influenced by the environment. If I was in a toxic environment, I guarantee I would be toxic as well to a degree. Now, I do have my core values that might not be shaken, but still, after a certain period of time, if negative behaviors are being rewarded and being incentivized, then as a result, I will do the same. I was in a toxic environment. I was in an environment a few years ago in which I didn't know who I was. And this want to fit in definitely derived from insecurity, so to speak, where you aren't sure who you are as an individual. So you strive so hard to please the people around you and do whatever it is in order to fit in, because you have no sense of self, that as a result, you slowly merge into the individual of the other people around you, and you have no clear sense of self. And that's what happened to me. In my early 20s, I didn't know who I was. I didn't know what I wanted. I think deep down I knew who I was and who I wanted, but I rejected that individual so deeply that as a result, I didn't know who I was. I think the reason I rejected who I was innately was out of fear of judgment, out of fear of rejection, out of fear of being described as feminine due to some of my interests, speaking about my emotions, speaking about what I'm thinking about, speaking about other people and other people's behaviors, or any of that. I think any sort of small conversation around that or any thought about that, I felt like was going to be somewhat feminine or interpreted as feminine, because I'd never seen a man act in that sort of way. So as a result, I hid that side of myself. And that came from not having a father figure in my life and really not having any sort of male role model or male participation in my upbringing. So I think at every time I was like, oh yeah, imagine, maybe I could be, more feminine because I haven't had a male role model in my life. But there's no element of truth to that, because I've defined what a real man is previously, or masculinity in the past, on this podcast. So I don't want to go into that. But I rejected that person so strongly that I did whatever I could in order to be in the in group, in order to fit in. I was surrounded by people who talked about other people. I was surrounded by people who were interested in the material, who spoke about people and their status and who the individual is based off what they do, not who they are. What school do they go to? What rugby team are they playing for? What do they do for work? Where do they live? What do they drive? How big is their house? And I knew deep down that wasn't me, but I was part of this group I was surrounded by people who spoke that way, and that was their way of doing things. So as a result, I became that individual. And you would not like that person if you met that person today. You wouldn't dislike them. You would just assume that that's just a normal guy, vanilla little guy. He doesn't have independent thought. He's just a little NPC that goes with the grain. He goes with the crowd, and his thoughts aren't his thoughts. They're other people's thoughts. And it's interesting because maybe there's other people in that group who are also thinking the same, but they didn't remove themselves from that environment. But I know that people, getting back to my point, that people are adaptable based off my experience with that I was shaped into an individual that I didn't recognize purely by the people surrounded by me. Only when I had space from that environment did I realize how much of a toxic environment it was, and the culture that that group had created, the culture of the friend group and what that had created. And I felt so alone and I felt so isolated. Even though I was surrounded by people, I didn't feel like I was seen or heard. So as a result, I can understand that people are adaptable, that people are easily influenced based off their environment. So the same can be said if I was in a toxic working environment. The same can be said if I'm in a toxic real estate company. But on the flip side, the same can be said if I'm in a positive environment, a positive company, a positive culture, a culture in which that we define positive, a positive culture as progression, moving forward, honesty, integrity, transparency, people who live by their word, people who are accountable for their actions, people who look to the future and not to the past, people who don't whine and don't complain, people who aren't negative, people who are growth minded and always striving for going forward. And they want to participate not only from a selfish way of making money, but from a way of valuably contributing to the environment in order to build something meaningful. So if that's the environment in which that we have created, a culture that we have created, then that's so important because that's how we go out into the world. And that's who we identify as. And that's who we are. And those are our values. And as a result, once you've got the culture in order, you can start hiring the people. Those people accept the culture because when a new person joins a company, it is going to be the current employees, the current brokers there who are acting the culture that has been created previously. Then as a result, the new people just assume that's the way in which that things are done here and how we speak and how we talk and how we think and how we show up. So as a result, these individuals are the positive role models for the new joiners, and it creates this environment where it is self-sustaining as long as the core values are kept from the top, middle and bottom, and we continue to do so. So then we hire the right people, then we move forward, then so much of what we do is derived by that. And I can't explain how important that is. And that's in any group if you're listening to this and you're not in real estate. That's in if you're going to a community here in Dubai at the weekend. That's if you're part of a football team. That's if you're part of any sports team. That's your family. What's the culture like? What is accepted? what is not accepted, what's incentivized, what's rewarded, what are the values. How can you define that? What are some of the things that you think about when I say this? Think of a community that you're part of. Think of an environment that you're part of. Define what an individual or who they are as an individual. If you could imagine one individual from this community, who are they? What are their values? How do they show up? Is that the same as some other people? Is there a clear culture there, or is there none? Because when there's a lack of culture, positive or negative, then you get this lack of depth where people don't feel like they're part of something, where it feels like this is just a group of individuals and there's nothing further and deeper than that. And those things don't sustain, and those things don't last. And how I can flip this into a run club is there's run clubs out there where you can't get a sense of what the vibes, feelings, the culture, the values are. And there's a lack of depth there, where the whole run club is surrounding the founder or the individual, and all of the videos are about them. And from social media, you can assume that this person sees themselves as the center of the universe, and everybody who is so grateful to be in their presence, will also be part of it. But you can see that there's a lack of depth. And what that does is you get a revolving door of people coming in and out of that community, where you don't see the same individuals back there. And for me, the culture that we're creating in the Run Club is a culture that I like and I enjoy and that I think is important. And the people who feel aligned with that and people who feel like they're part of that keep coming back. And the people who don't come back. And that's amazing, because then that's just self-selecting. Then we're bringing people into it that are like us in terms of their values, in terms of their beliefs, in terms of what they think is important. And we're creating this thing of a snowball effect where we're getting more people who are aligned, and you're creating something more than just followers, views, people turning up and running. There's something deeper there, and it's hard to put your finger on it, and it's hard to measure it, because it's sticky, because it's murky, because it's based off qualitative data, which would be language based, instead of numbers, quantitative. I mean, I don't even want to go into talk about how it could be measured, but it definitely could be measured. But anyways, it's more difficult than something in terms of followers, views, and participants. But the importance of it is that you create an environment in which that somebody could describe it as a cult. And I love that. I love that. And I find it so interesting how a cult would be created. Not just like a negative. I'm not talking about like some, I don't fucking know, like some midsummer cult where people are worshipped and people are sacrificed to some gods or whatever. That's not the cult I'm talking about. I'm talking about a positive cult. And for me, that's so interesting, because it's only based off human behavior, and it's boiling back to everything that I've spoke within this. It's like, and the kind of core ways you can build a cult is have a doctrine of how you speak and what your values are. How do the individuals show up in the world? Like, what are the little mottos or the words or the catchphrases that they say? Where do those individuals feel like that they are going? An important aspect also of a cult is, who is the enemy? Who is the people that we understand we are not like and we will never be like? And in a company, it's important, and in any community, it's important to have these enemies, these people who we refuse to be like, and the people who we don't want to be like. Because if we don't want to be like a certain people, or a certain other group, then it strengthens who we are and it comes closer together. Just like any team sport where it's us versus them, it creates that team environment. It creates that cult, so to speak. And for me, that's super interesting because then you're able to, if we're talking like business, like you're able to create people who stay within the company far more than just monetarily speaking. And people feel like they're part of something. And that's what I was missing in my previous company. That is what I was missing. It didn't feel like I was going anywhere. It didn't feel like I was part of something. It didn't feel like I was growing together and I was meaningfully contributing to the company other than monetarily speaking. And that's fine for people. Some brokers want to go in, make money, leave. And that's just not who I am. And I don't think that is where I am in my life. And I would rather create something for the sake of creating something special than for making money. Because what kind of legacy is that? What kind of legacy is it to talk about how much money you made in your life? On your deathbed or at your funeral, they're not going to be talking about how much money you made. They're not going to be talking about the things that you bought. They're going to talk about the feeling of something that you created. They're going to talk about who you are as an individual. They're going to talk about the feeling that they had when they were around you or they were in something that you had built. And it won't be quantitative, it will be qualitative. And it will be all about who you are and your values and how you made other people feel and how you made them feel. And it won't be how much money you had in the bank. And that's that. If you agree with that, then there's a far deeper meaning in this life than just purely how much you make or what you drive or where you live or what you work as or what school you went to or what team you're part of purely for a status reason. There's far more meaning to this life. And that's interesting to me. Because if we can create this culture, if we can create an environment, then we are influencing people. And we're doing something together. And people can't really explain what it is or put their finger on it. But they have an idea what you mean. So that's something I've been thinking about a lot. And sustaining that culture. And sometimes these cultures are created accidentally. And sometimes thought is never put into them. Just like at the very start of this conversation, when I spoke to you about the head of sales at this company, he never thought about this as an idea. He never thought about culture. And when you look to that company and you think about who the individuals are in that company, you don't get an idea of who they are, or the environment, or how it might feel. And yeah, they might be making money, but it depends what you're aiming for. Both can exist at the same time. One must come before the other. I think the right way is to build a culture and then start solving the money problems. But maybe I'm just saying that because I'm biased. Maybe I'm just saying that because I'm biased. And maybe you've got an opinion on this. So I'll be interested to hear about it. That's all for this episode.